a simple woman mocked by elite architects, only for them to discover she's the brilliant mind behind the design that changed everything. They saw her modest clothes amidst their designer suits, heard whispers of, "She doesn't belong," but never imagined the talent behind her unassuming appearance, or the lesson they were about to learn. The grand chandeliers of the Maxwell Gallery cast a golden glow over Chicago's most prestigious architectural exhibition. Women in couture gowns and men in bespoke suits circulated through the space, champagne flutes in hand, examining the innovative designs displayed on illuminated pedestals throughout the room. The annual Apex Award for Architectural Innovation had drawn the biggest names in the industry, all vying for recognition and the $1 million commission that accompanied the honor. Olivia Garcia adjusted the sleeves of her simple navy blazer as she entered the gallery. At 36, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, minimal makeup accentuating her warm brown eyes. Unlike the other architects and designers present, she wore no statement jewelry, carried no designer bag, and her blazer was paired with serviceable black slacks and comfortable flats instead of stilettos. As she moved through the crowd, her eyes were drawn not to the people but to the architectural models displayed throughout the space. Each one represented months, sometimes years of work, dreams given form in miniature, waiting to become reality. "Excuse me, the staff entrance is in the back," came a polished voice. Olivia turned to find a tall woman in her 40s eyeing her with professional detachment. Elizabeth Winters, chairperson of the Apex Award Committee, stood before her in a tailored white pantsuit that probably cost more than Olivia's monthly rent. Her blonde hair was arranged in an elegant updo, diamond earrings catching the light with each slight movement of her head. "I'm actually a participant," Olivia replied calmly, offering her Olivia Garcia. Elizabeth examined the invitation with perfectly manicured fingers, her expression shifting from dismissal to forced politeness. "Of course, community center project. How interesting." The way she emphasized community center made it sound like an architectural consolation prize rather than a legitimate entry. Elizabeth handed the invitation back with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The open bar is that way," she said, gesturing vaguely before turning her attention to a famous architect who had just arrived, her excitement visibly genuine as she greeted him with air kisses. Olivia moved further into the gallery, unperturbed. After 15 years in the industry, she was accustomed to such treatment. Her firm, Horizon Designs, wasn't a household name, and she hadn't graduated from an Ivy League school. Her parents had immigrated from Mexico before she was born, and she'd worked her way through state college on scholarships and part-time jobs. Architecture hadn't been a family legacy but a passion she'd discovered in high school when her drafting teacher recognized her spatial intelligence. She paused before a model of a sleek skyscraper, noting the impressive cantilever design, but also the impracticality of the shadows it would cast on surrounding buildings. From behind her, she heard a male voice commenting to companions, "Looks like someone wandered in from the street." Security is getting lax these days. Suppressing a sigh, Olivia moved on to the next display without turning around. Tonight wasn't about impressing people with her appearance, it was about architecture, the language she spoke most fluently. Near a stunning model of a cultural center, she found herself beside Grant Edwards, a renowned architect whose work she genuinely admired. In his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and distinctive black framed glasses, he was speaking animatedly to a small group of admirers. "The integration of negative space is critical," he was saying. "Too many young architects fill every inch because they're afraid of emptiness." Olivia nodded unconsciously, agreeing with his assessment. Grant noticed her reaction and turned slightly. "You agree?" he asked, not recognizing her but extending professional courtesy nonetheless. "Yes," Olivia replied. "Empty space gives the eyes somewhere to rest and the mind somewhere to dream. Architecture isn't just about the structure but about the possibilities it creates." Grant looked at her with new interest, but before he could respond, a woman in a red designer dress interjected. "Grant, darling, you absolutely must see Marcus Blackwood's entry. It's revolutionary. He's using that new composite material everyone's talking about." His attention diverted, Grant allowed himself to be led away, offering Olivia an apologetic smile. The woman in red gave Olivia a dismissive glance, clearly wondering why Grant had bothered speaking with someone so plainly dressed. Olivia continued her circuit of the room, stopping before an architectural model shrouded in black fabric. Unlike the other displays, this one was completely concealed, waiting for the moment of the big reveal. A small card identified it only as Project Metamorphosis, with no architect listed, the competition's mystery entry. Intrigued, asked a deep voice beside her. She turned to find Michael Chen, the competition's head judge and founder of one of the country's most prestigious architectural firms. In his mid-40s, He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, but it was his eyes that commanded attention, dark, perceptive, and keenly intelligent, very Olivia admitted. The anonymity is a bold choice. Michael nodded. The architect requested it, said they wanted the work judged purely on its merits, not on reputation. His gaze assessed her with professional interest. Are you an architect or a design student? The question was asked without condescension, a genuine inquiry rather than a dismissal. An architect, she replied. Olivia Garcia, Horizon Designs. Recognition flickered across his face. The community center submission. Your use of sustainable materials within a limited budget was remarkable. Surprise and pleasure warmed her. You've studied the entries personally. All of them, he confirmed. That's my job as head judge. Some committee members delegate the preliminary review, but I believe in forming my own impressions. Before they could continue their conversation, Elizabeth Winters appeared, touching Michael's arm with familiar ease. Michael, the Hendersons have arrived. They're major donors to the foundation, and they've been asking to meet you all evening. He nodded, professional duty calling. Ms. Garcia, it was a pleasure. I look forward to discussing your work in more detail later. As he walked away, Elizabeth remained, her gaze traveling over Olivia's simple outfit. You know, she said with the air of someone offering helpful advice, presentation matters in this industry. First impressions can make or break a career. The comment was delivered with a smile, but the message was clear: you don't look like you belong here. Thank you, Olivia replied evenly. I'll keep that in mind. Elizabeth's smile tightened slightly at Olivia's unruffled response. The announcement will begin in 30 minutes. The open bar closes in 15, just so you know. With that, she glided away to greet more distinguished guests. Olivia checked her watch, a simple timepiece with a worn leather band. It's a gift from her father when she graduated college. The face was expensive, Swiss-made, though few would recognize its value at a glance. Much like herself, she thought with a small smile. She decided to find a quiet corner to observe the room before the announcement. As she moved toward the back of the gallery, she overheard fragments of conversations. Who designed that community center? Looks like a glorified strip mall. Did you see her shoes? Definitely not Lobotin. Probably someone's assistant who snuck in for the free drinks. The comments rolled off her like water from waxed canvas. She hadn't entered this profession for social validation or to climb exclusive ladders. She'd become an architect because she believed in creating spaces that transformed lives, structures that served communities, not just egos. Finding a relatively quiet spot near a window overlooking the Chicago skyline, Olivia took a moment to center herself. The city light sparkled against the dark backdrop of Lake Michigan, reminding her why she loved this work. Each glowing window represented lives being lived, stories unfolding within spaces someone had designed. They're quite something, aren't they? Came a gentle voice. Olivia turned to find an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes regarding her with a warm smile. Unlike most attendees, she wore a simple pantsuit not unlike Olivia's own, though the fabric was clearly of higher quality. The people or the buildings? Olivia asked with a slight smile. The woman laughed. Both, I suppose. Though I've always found buildings more reliable. I'm Helen Forrester. Olivia recognized the name immediately. Helen Forrester had been a pioneering female architect in the 1970s, breaking barriers in a male-dominated field. Now in her 70s, she had designed some of Chicago's most beloved public spaces. Olivia Garcia, she replied, extending her hand. It's an honor to meet you. Your work on the Lakefront Children's Museum was one of my inspirations for becoming an architect. Helen's eyes crinkled with pleasure. How lovely to hear. That project faced tremendous opposition at the time. The establishment thought it was too whimsical, too focused on the user experience rather than architectural purity. She gazed out at the skyline. Now it's one of the most visited buildings in the city. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Helen spoke again. I noticed you earlier. You moved through this room differently than the others. How so? Olivia asked. You look at the models first, the people second. Most here do the opposite. Helen's perceptive gaze studied her. You're here for the architecture, not the networking. Olivia nodded. Architecture speaks its own language. I've found it more consistent than social approval. A wise perspective. Helen agreed, though not always the easiest path. She glanced around the room. This industry still places tremendous value on appearances and connections. It shouldn't, but it does. Did you find that difficult? Olivia asked. Being a woman in the field when there were so few? Helen's expression turned reflective. I did. For years I tried to blend in, wore what they wore, spoke how they spoke. One day, I realized I was designing myself to fit into someone else's structure instead of creating my own. Her eyes regained their sparkle. After that, I started wearing comfortable shoes to site visits. Small rebellion, but it felt significant at the time. Olivia laughed. Hence the practical flats tonight. Precisely, Helen confirmed with a conspiratorial smile. Life's too short for painful shoes, and buildings don't care what you wear to design them. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a knife tapping against glass. Elizabeth Winters stood at the center of the room, commanding attention. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. It's time for the moment we've all been waiting for. The announcement of this year's Apex Award winner. The crowd quieted, moving closer to the center of the gallery where the covered mystery model stood on an illuminated pedestal. Michael Chen joined Elizabeth at the front, along with the other 4 judges, all established names in architecture and design. This year's competition was extraordinary. Elizabeth continued. We received over 200 submissions from 15 countries. Our judging panel narrowed these down to the 10 finalists whose work you've seen displayed tonight. She gestured to the models around the room. Each represents excellence in architectural innovation. However, one submission stood apart, a design that challenges conventional thinking while remaining deeply practical. It's environmentally conscious and beautiful. Michael Chen stepped forward. The winning design reimagines what public architecture can be. It creates a space that transforms according to community needs, utilizing sustainable materials and innovative construction techniques that could revolutionize how we approach public buildings in the future. Elizabeth resumed speaking, building anticipation. The architect behind this visionary design will receive not only the Apex Trophy and the $1 million commission, but also the opportunity to see their concept become reality through full funding from the Winters Foundation. The crowd murmured appreciatively. This was why the Apex Award was so coveted. It wasn't just recognition, but the rare chance to bring an innovative concept to life without compromise. And now, Elizabeth said, her voice rising dramatically, the winner of this year's Apex Award for Architectural Innovation is. She paused for effect, her hand reaching for the black cloth covering the mystery model. Project Metamorphosis. With a flourish, she pulled away the fabric, revealing an architectural model unlike any other in the room. The design defied conventional categorization, neither a traditional building nor a modern abstraction, but something entirely new. It appeared to be a public space that could transform based on community needs, with walls that could be reconfigured, spaces that could expand or contract, and natural elements integrated throughout. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as attendees moved closer to examine the revolutionary design. Even the most jaded architects looked impressed. This remarkable design, Michael explained, conceives architecture not as static but as responsive, a living system that evolves with its users. The technical innovations alone would merit recognition, but what truly distinguished this entry was its human-centered approach. This isn't just a building. It's a new way of thinking about the relationship between structures and the people who inhabit them. Elizabeth, clearly enjoying the moment, raised her voice again. And now, would the architect behind Project Metamorphosis please come forward to claim the award? The crowd looked around expectantly, wondering which famous name would step forward. Several prominent architects straightened their posture, ready to accept accolades. After a moment of silence, Olivia took a deep breath and began walking toward the center of the room. A path cleared before her, though not out of respect but confusion. Murmurs followed in her wake. Who is she? There must be some mistake. Is she collecting it for someone else? Elizabeth's perfect smile faltered as Olivia approached. I'm sorry, she said quietly as Olivia reached the pedestal. We're waiting for the designer of Project Metamorphosis. I am the designer, Olivia said simply. Elizabeth blinked, disbelief evident in her expression. You're Olivia Garcia. Yes! And you created this? Elizabeth gestured to the model, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. Michael Chen, watching the interaction closely, stepped forward. Ms. Garcia, your submission was entered anonymously. Why? Olivia met his gaze directly. Because I wanted the design to be judged on its merits, not on my reputation or lack thereof. Architecture should speak for itself. He nodded slowly, a smile of understanding and respect spreading across his face. Indeed it should. And yours spoke eloquently. He extended his hand. Congratulations, Ms. Garcia. It's a remarkable achievement. The crowd's reaction was a mixture of surprise, confusion, and reluctant admiration. Grant Edwards, the architect who had briefly spoken with her earlier, looked stunned. The woman in the red dress who had pulled him away was now frantically whispering to companions, clearly embarrassed. Elizabeth, ever the professional, quickly recovered. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm round of applause to Olivia Garcia, this year's Apex Award winner. The applause that followed was polite but subdued, tinged with confusion and, from some quarters, resentment. Olivia accepted the crystal trophy with grace, her expression calm despite the scrutiny of hundreds of eyes. Michael handed her a microphone. "Would you like to say a few words?" Olivia nodded, taking a moment to gather her thoughts before addressing the crowd. Architecture, at its core, isn't about the architect. It's about creating spaces that serve people, all people, not just those who can afford luxury. Project Metamorphosis grew from a simple question. What if a building could truly respond to the diverse and changing needs of a community? She gestured to her model. Every element of this design was created to be accessible, sustainable, and adaptable. The materials can be sourced locally in almost any region, reducing carbon footprint. The construction techniques can be taught to local workers, creating jobs. And most importantly, the spaces can be reconfigured by the community itself as needs evolve. Her voice grew stronger, passion evident in her words. "I believe architecture has a responsibility not just to shelter people, but to empower them. A building should be a tool for community transformation, not just a statement of artistic vision." She paused, looking around the room at the surprised faces of Chicago's architectural elite. "I'm honored to receive this award, and I look forward to seeing Project Metamorphosis become reality. Thank you." The applause that followed was warmer this time, with a few enthusiastic voices calling out "Bravo." Helen Forrester, standing at the back, nodded approvingly, a proud smile on her face. As Olivia stepped away from the microphone, Elizabeth quickly took control again, directing attention to the open bar and announcing that the gallery would remain open for another hour for guests to mingle and examine the winning design more closely. The crowd dispersed, but now their whispers had changed. "Did you know about her before tonight? Olivia Garcia. Remember that name? Where did she come from? Did you see Elizabeth's face when she stepped forward?" Michael Chen approached Olivia, his expression thoughtful. "Your speech explained the what but not the why. Why enter anonymously when recognition would benefit your career?" Olivia considered her answer carefully. "I've spent my career watching brilliant designs be dismissed because they came from the wrong people, women, minorities, those without Ivy League credentials or family connections. I wanted to create something that would be judged purely on its own merits." Michael nodded slowly, "and force the industry to confront its biases in the process. That was a secondary benefit," she acknowledged with a small smile. "Well, it worked," he said. "I witnessed at least 3 prominent architects realize they dismissed you earlier this evening." Their expressions were educational. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by a stream of people suddenly eager to meet the woman behind Project Metamorphosis. Business cards appeared from designer pockets, invitations to speak at conferences were extended, and several prominent firm representatives hinted at potential job offers. Elizabeth Winters hovered at the edges of this circle, her expression a complex mixture of embarrassment, recalculation, and professional damage control. When there was a brief lull, she swooped in, taking Olivia's arm with forced familiarity. "Olivia, darling, we simply must discuss the implementation details for the Winters Foundation funding. Why don't we step somewhere quieter?" Olivia allowed herself to be guided to a corner of the gallery, away from the crowd. Elizabeth's demeanor had transformed completely, her dismissiveness replaced by eager accommodation. "Your design is absolutely visionary," Elizabeth gushed, her voice honeyed with newfound respect. "I always knew there was something special about the community center entry as well. In fact, I was just telling Michael earlier how impressed I was with your use of sustainable materials." Olivia regarded her calmly. "Were you? That's not the impression I received." Elizabeth faltered momentarily before recovering. "Well, in these events, one must be somewhat reserved in expressing opinions before the announcement. Professional ethics, you understand." "Of course." Sensing Olivia wasn't going to make this easy for her, Elizabeth changed tactics. "The press will want interviews, naturally. We should coordinate our messaging about the project. The Winters Foundation likes to maintain certain standards in our public communications." "What sort of standards?" Olivia asked. "Oh, emphasis on innovation, sustainability, our commitment to transforming urban spaces, all the elements your design embodies so brilliantly." Elizabeth smiled widely. "We'll want to schedule a professional photo shoot right away, perhaps update your official bio on the foundation website. First impressions are so important in this business." The irony of Elizabeth's earlier, helpful advice about presentation wasn't lost on Olivia. "I'm happy to discuss the project's technical aspects with the press," she said evenly. "As for photos and bios, my work speaks for itself. That was rather the point of my anonymous submission." Elizabeth's smile tightened. "Olivia, dear, winning the Apex Award changes things. You're going to be very visible now, representing not just yourself but the foundation as well. We have certain expectations about how our partners present themselves." Olivia met her gaze directly. "My design met your judging criteria. My appearance and background didn't factor into that evaluation, nor should they now. Before Elizabeth could respond, they were joined by Helen Forrester, who had been observing the interaction from nearby. Elizabeth, I see you're getting acquainted with our winner, Helen said pleasantly. Olivia's approach reminds me so much of your father's early work, substance over style, innovation born of necessity. Elizabeth's expression shifted at the mention of her father, the founder of both the Winters Foundation and the architectural firm she now headed. Yes, well, times have changed. The public face of architecture has evolved, has it? Helen's tone remained light, but her eyes were sharp. I recall when your father wore the same rumpled blazer to every site visit because he was too focused on his designs to care about fashion. He'd be fascinated by Olivia's work. The reminder of her father's humble beginnings clearly discomforted Elizabeth. With forced brightness, she said, "We're all looking forward to working closely with Olivia on bringing her vision to life. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on our other guests." As Elizabeth retreated, Helen turned to Olivia with a knowing smile. She'll be more manageable now that she's been reminded where her family fortune came from. Robert Winters was a brilliant architect but a terrible dresser. Built his first major project wearing overalls because he was working alongside the construction crew. Olivia laughed softly. "Thank you for the rescue." "Not at all," Helen replied. "I've been watching you navigate this room all evening. You've handled everything with remarkable grace, but even the most patient architect occasionally needs structural support." They were interrupted by the arrival of Grant Edwards, the renowned architect Olivia had briefly spoken with earlier. His expression was a mixture of admiration and chagrin. "Ms. Garcia," he said, extending his hand, "I owe you an apology. Our conversation earlier, I should have recognized your name." "No apology necessary," Olivia replied, shaking his hand. "I prefer being judged on my ideas rather than my reputation." "Well, after seeing Project Metamorphosis, your reputation is secure," he said with genuine admiration. "The adaptive framework you've developed could revolutionize community architecture. I'd love to discuss your material selection process sometime." "I'd welcome that conversation," Olivia replied sincerely. As the evening continued, Olivia found herself the center of attention, approached by architects and designers who had ignored or dismissed her earlier. Some were genuinely interested in her work, while others clearly sought to align themselves with the newest star in their firmament. Through it all, Olivia maintained her quiet dignity, discussing architectural principles with passion, but never displaying resentment toward those who had judged her based on appearances. She was neither smug in victory nor desperate for validation, simply an architect discussing the work she loved. Near the end of the evening, as the crowd had thinned, Michael Chen approached her again, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered one to Olivia. "To architecture that speaks for itself," he said, raising his glass. "And to those who listen," she responded, clinking her glass against his. After taking a sip, Michael regarded her thoughtfully. "You knew, didn't you? How they would react to you, how they would dismiss you based on appearances." "I had a strong suspicion," Olivia admitted. "It's happened often enough before. Yet you didn't alter your approach, no designer clothes, no attempt to fit their expectations. Would you have respected me more if I had?" she asked. Michael considered this, then shook his head. "No. But I would have understood it as a practical concession to reality. Reality should be challenged when it's flawed," Olivia replied simply. "Besides, authentic architecture requires authentic architects. How could I design spaces of integrity if I compromised my own?" He nodded slowly. "A philosophy that extends beyond buildings. Architecture is never just about buildings," she said with a smile. "It's about how we choose to exist in the world." As the evening drew to a close, Olivia prepared to leave, her award carefully packed in a carrying case provided by the organizers. As she moved toward the exit, Elizabeth Winters intercepted her one final time. "Olivia," she said, her tone carefully modulated to convey both authority and newfound respect. "My car can take you home. We have much to discuss about next steps." "Thank you, but I'm fine taking a cab," Olivia replied. "As for next steps, I'll be available to meet with your team next week to begin the formal process." Elizabeth seemed taken aback by the polite refusal. "But surely, the hour is late, and we could use the drive to get better acquainted." What Elizabeth meant, Olivia understood, was that she wanted private time to establish control over their new relationship, to define terms and expectations before Olivia had time to fully process her new position of leverage. "I appreciate the offer," Olivia said firmly, "but tonight has been quite stimulating. I need some quiet time to reflect before we dive into the details." Before Elizabeth could press further, Helen Forrester joined them. "Actually, I was hoping to give Olivia a ride, so I'd love to hear more about her adaptive framework, and my driver is already waiting." Elizabeth had no choice but to concede gracefully. "Of course." Olivia, We'll have our people call your office tomorrow to schedule a proper meeting. Perfect, Olivia agreed. Good night, Elizabeth. As Olivia and Helen stepped out into the cool Chicago night, Helen chuckled softly. She's going to be up all night researching you, you know. Trying to figure out how she missed recognizing such talent. She didn't miss it, Olivia replied. She just assumed it couldn't exist in someone who looked like me, who didn't fit her mental image of a great architect. Helen nodded sagely as they approached her waiting car. The most persistent structure in our profession isn't made of steel or concrete, but of preconception. It takes tremendous force to reshape it. Or, Olivia suggested with a smile, a design that makes people question their assumptions. Indeed, Helen agreed, sliding into the back seat beside Olivia. Project Metamorphosis might transform more than just physical spaces. As the car pulled away from the gallery, Olivia gazed out at the Chicago skyline, the buildings illuminated against the night sky. Each represented someone's vision made manifest, ideas transformed into spaces that shaped human experience. Tonight, she had earned the right to add her own vision to that skyline, but perhaps more importantly, she had challenged the invisible structures that determined whose visions were deemed worthy of becoming reality. It wasn't just a personal victory, but a small shift in the foundations of a system built on appearances rather than substance. The real work, both of creating her building and of changing perceptions, was just beginning. But for tonight, as the city lights blurred past her window, Olivia allowed herself to feel the quiet satisfaction of having spoken her truth in the language she knew best, architecture that stood on its own merits, regardless of its creator's appearance or background. And in the silence of the car, with the award beside her and the Chicago skyline as her witness, that felt like enough. 6 months later, Olivia stood on the construction site of Project Metamorphosis, now taking physical form in what had once been an abandoned lot on Chicago's west side. The morning sun cast long shadows across the innovative framework, highlighting the unique structural elements that would allow the building to transform according to community needs. She wore a hard hat and practical boots, her simple attire now a recognized trademark rather than a subject of dismissal. In the months since winning the Apex Award, Olivia had become something of an industry sensation, not just for her revolutionary design, but for the story of how it had been judged anonymously, forcing the architectural establishment to confront its biases.
It's Garcia,
called a young architecture student who was part of the internship program Olivia had insisted on as part of the project. The community representatives have arrived for the site tour, Olivia smiled. Unlike traditional projects where the client was a corporation or wealthy individual, Project Metamorphosis belonged to the community it would serve. From the beginning, she had involved local residents, business owners, and community organizations in the development process, ensuring the space would truly meet their needs. As she walked toward the site entrance, she spotted a familiar figure, Elizabeth Winters, impeccably dressed as always but noticeably more subdued in her approach. The past 6 months had been an education for Elizabeth, who had initially attempted to exert control over the project only to discover that Olivia's contract, carefully negotiated after her win, gave her final authority on design decisions. Elizabeth greeted her, extending a manicured hand. The progress is remarkable. The foundation board is extremely pleased. Good morning, Elizabeth, Olivia replied, shaking her hand firmly. I'm glad to hear it. We're on schedule and under budget. Elizabeth nodded, glancing around the construction site and the community involvement program. How is that proceeding? Extraordinarily well, Olivia said, genuine enthusiasm warming her voice. 30 local residents are receiving construction training while working on the project. 5 architecture students from community colleges are interning with my firm. And the design committee of local representatives has contributed some brilliant ideas for the interior spaces. Elizabeth's expression reflected a complex mixture of emotions, admiration for the project's success, lingering discomfort with Olivia's approach, and a gradual, reluctant recognition that her own preconceptions had been flawed. You know, Elizabeth said after a moment, when my father started the foundation, his vision was quite similar to this, architecture that served communities rather than just creating monuments. She hesitated, then added with uncharacteristic candor, somewhere along the way, we became more focused on prestige than purpose. Olivia studied her, noting the hint of genuine reflection in Elizabeth's eyes. It's never too late to reconnect with an original vision, she offered. Before their conversation could continue, they were joined by the community representatives, a diverse group including a local high school principal, the owner of a family restaurant, a community organizer, and several residents of different ages. Unlike 6 months ago at the gallery, Elizabeth was now the one who seemed slightly out of place in her designer outfit, while Olivia moved comfortably among people dressed similarly to herself. Welcome, everyone, Olivia greeted them warmly. Today we'll be walking through the main structure and discussing the next phase of interior development. As the tour proceeded, Olivia explained technical aspects in accessible language, genuinely seeking input from the community members and integrating their suggestions. Elizabeth observed this interaction with growing interest, noting how Olivia's approach generated enthusiasm and ownership among the community representatives. When they reached the central space, an area designed to transform from performance venue to marketplace to community meeting room with minimal effort, Elizabeth found herself standing next to Carmen Rodriguez, the community organizer who had been initially skeptical of the project. "It's not what I expected," Carmen admitted, looking up at the innovative ceiling design that would allow natural light to be directed according to the space's current configuration. "The building?" Elizabeth asked. Carmen shook her head slightly. "The architect. When the foundation announced this project, I assumed we'd get some famous name who'd design something impressive but impractical. Something to win awards but not serve actual needs." She nodded toward Olivia, who was kneeling beside an elderly resident, sketching a modification based on his suggestion. "She's different. She listens." Elizabeth watched Olivia with new eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "She does." The tour concluded at the site of what would become Sophie's Butterfly Garden, a green space named after a local child who had suggested the building needed a place where plants and people could grow together. Olivia had incorporated the 8-year-old suggestion into the designs, creating an adaptive garden space that would serve both aesthetic and practical purposes, providing fresh produce for the community kitchen that would operate within the building. "This is where we'll need volunteers for planting next month," Olivia explained. "Sophie has already selected the butterfly, attracting plants she wants to include." As the community representatives discussed volunteer scheduling, Elizabeth approached Olivia again. "I have a confession to make," she said quietly. Olivia raised an eyebrow, waiting. "When you won the Apex Award, I was disappointed," Elizabeth admitted. "Not because your design wasn't brilliant, it was unquestionably, but because you didn't fit my image of what a visionary architect should be. I've spent my career cultivating a certain image, believing it was necessary for success in this industry." She gestured toward the construction sites, the innovative structure taking shape against the sky. "But this, what you're creating here, it's making me question everything I thought I knew about architectural excellence. And about what really matters." Olivia was silent for a moment, absorbing Elizabeth's unexpected vulnerability. "Architecture reflects our values," she said finally. "Not just in the buildings we create, but in how we create them, who we include, who we listen to, what we prioritize." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to understand that." She hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic humility. "The foundation is considering expanding this model to other cities. Community-centered design with local involvement throughout the process. We'd like you to consult on developing the program." Olivia couldn't hide her surprise. "You want me to help shape the foundation's approach?" "Yes," Elizabeth confirmed. "Your perspective, it's valuable. More valuable than I initially recognized." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The woman who had dismissed Olivia based on her appearance was now seeking her guidance on the foundation's future direction. "I'll consider it," Olivia said finally, "but only if the program genuinely empowers communities rather than imposing architectural solutions on them." "That's exactly what we need to learn," Elizabeth acknowledged. "How to listen before we design." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Michael Chen, who had been monitoring the project's progress with keen interest. Like Elizabeth, he too had evolved over the past 6 months, moving from appreciation of Olivia's design to genuine respect for her holistic approach to architecture. "The structural innovations are even more impressive in reality than they were in the model," he remarked, gazing up at the building's adaptive framework. "Several engineering firms have contacted me about the potential applications in other contexts. The credit belongs to my entire team," Olivia replied. "Particularly our structural engineer, Raj Patel. He solved problems that most people said were unsolvable." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That seems to be a pattern with you, Ms. Garcia, achieving what others deemed impossible." He glanced at Elizabeth, both architecturally and otherwise. The three of them stood in contemplative silence, watching as the community representatives continued their animated discussion about the butterfly garden. The contrast between this collaborative scene and the exclusive gallery event 6 months earlier couldn't have been more pronounced. "I should join them," Olivia said, gesturing toward the community group. "We need to finalize the planting schedule." As she walked away, Michael turned to Elizabeth. "She's changing more than just this neighborhood, you know." Elizabeth watched Olivia kneeling beside Sophie, the young girl whose butterfly garden idea had been incorporated into the design. Yes, she agreed quietly. She's changing all of us. 1 year later, Olivia stood at the podium in the main hall of the completed Project Metamorphosis building. The space was filled to capacity. Community members, architectural professionals, media representatives, and students all gathered for the official opening ceremony. The building had exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. Its adaptive design allowed it to serve multiple functions: community center, marketplace, performance venue, educational space, health clinic, and more. The materials were sustainable, the energy systems self-sufficient, and the construction had provided training and employment for local residents. Most remarkably, the building had already become a source of community pride and ownership. Local artists had contributed murals and sculptures. Neighborhood organizations had developed programming for the flexible spaces. Elderly residents taught cooking classes in the community kitchen, while teenagers ran a technology repair clinic in the maker space. Project Metamorphosis was never just about creating a building, Olivia explained to the attentive audience. It was about creating possibilities, a space where community needs and dreams could take physical form. She gestured around the beautiful main hall, where modular elements could be rearranged to accommodate everything from theatrical performances to community meetings to indoor markets. What you see today is just the beginning. This building will continue to evolve as the community evolves. That's the true meaning of architecture, not imposing a static form but creating a framework for life to unfold. In the front row, Helen Forrester nodded approvingly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Beside her sat Michael Chen, who had become one of Olivia's strongest advocates in the industry. And next to him, perhaps most surprisingly, was Elizabeth Winters, whose transformation over the past 18 months had been remarkable. After her experience with Project Metamorphosis, Elizabeth had initiated a comprehensive review of the Winters Foundation's architectural programs. The result was a new initiative called Architecture of Inclusion, a program that emphasized community involvement, accessible design, and sustainable practices. Olivia served as a consultant on the program, which was already changing how architectural projects were approached in underserved communities across the country. As Olivia concluded her speech, she introduced the true stars of the day, the community members who had helped shape every aspect of the building, from its initial concept to the final details. One by one, they joined her on stage, each sharing briefly what the project meant to them and their neighborhood. The final speaker was Sophie, now 9 years old, who had inspired the butterfly garden that had become one of the building's most beloved features. "I didn't think grown-ups would listen to a kid like me," Sophie said shyly into the microphone. "But Ms. Olivia asked what I thought buildings needed, and I said butterflies because they make people happy. And she made it happen." The girl beamed with pride. "Now we have the prettiest garden in Chicago, and everybody can enjoy it, not just people with big houses." The audience erupted in applause as Sophie handed a small potted plant to Olivia, a butterfly bush the girl had grown herself from a cutting in the garden. After the ceremony, as attendees explored the building and enjoyed refreshments prepared by local businesses, Olivia found a quiet moment on the rooftop garden. From this vantage point, she could see the Chicago skyline in the distance, the architectural monuments created by famous names throughout the city's history. She was joined by Helen Forrester, who eased herself onto a bench with the careful movements of her 80 years. "Quite a view," Helen remarked, gazing out at the city. "Though I suspect you're looking at it differently than most." Olivia smiled. "How so?" "Most people see what's there," Helen said. "Architects see what could be." She gestured toward the skyline. "For all its beauty, most of that was built for commerce, for prestige, for the privileged. What you've created here is something different. Architecture that serves rather than impresses, that includes rather than excludes." "I had a good teacher," Olivia replied, looking meaningfully at the older woman who had become both mentor and friend. Helen laughed softly. "Perhaps. But you had the courage to stand your ground when it would have been easier to conform. Not everyone does." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Helen spoke again. "You know, when I was starting in this field, a male colleague told me I should wear more feminine clothes if I wanted to be taken seriously as an architect." "That makes no sense," Olivia said, frowning.
"Precisely,"
Helen agreed. The contradiction was lost on him. "He meant I should look decorative but not too professional, appealing but not threatening." She smoothed her simple linen pants. "I decided then that I would dress for the building site, not the boardroom. If my designs weren't enough to command respect, no outfit would fix that problem." Olivia nodded in understanding. "And yet, even 50 years later, progress comes slowly in some areas. Helen acknowledged, but it does come. Look at Elizabeth Winters. A year ago, she judged you by your shoes. Now she's revolutionizing her foundation's approach to community architecture. People can change when confronted with their biases. Olivia agreed, though not everyone does. True transformation requires both revelation and reflection, Helen said. Elizabeth had the revelation when your identity was revealed, but the reflection, that's the harder part. She had to examine her own assumptions, her own values. That takes courage. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Michael Chun, who approached with respectful deference to Helen before addressing Olivia. The Architectural Journal reporters would like a few more minutes of your time, he said. They're particularly interested in the community collaboration process. Olivia nodded. I'll be right there. As Michael departed, Helen rose from the bench. Your star is rising, my dear. Remember to keep your feet planted firmly on the ground, preferably in comfortable shoes. Olivia laughed. Always, before heading downstairs to meet the journalist. Olivia took one last look at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there, she knew, was another architect being judged by their appearance rather than their ideas. Another visionary being dismissed because they didn't fit someone's preconception of what greatness looked like. Perhaps, she thought, Project Metamorphosis would help change that too, not just transforming a building or a neighborhood, but slowly shifting the foundations of an industry built too often on image rather than substance. It was, after all, what architecture at its best had always done, reshaping not just physical spaces, but the way people experienced the world and each other. 5 years later, Olivia stood at the entrance to the Maxwell Gallery, the same venue where the Apex Awards ceremony had taken place. Tonight, it hosted a different event, the launch of her book, Architecture of Inclusion, which documented the impact of Project Metamorphosis and the community-centered design movement it had helped inspire. The gallery looked much the same, elegant lighting, polished floors, the same chandeliers casting a golden glow over the attendees. But the crowd was markedly different. While there were still prominent architects and designers present, they mingled with community organizers, students from diverse backgrounds, construction workers who had helped build Project Metamorphosis, and residents from the neighborhood it had transformed. Olivia herself had changed little in her appearance. She still dressed simply, tonight in a well-cut blazer over a plain blouse and comfortable pants. Her hair was perhaps a bit shorter, with a few strands of silver now visible at the temples. But the most noticeable difference was in how others responded to her. Where once she had been dismissed or overlooked, she was now greeted with genuine respect and admiration. Not because her clothing had changed, but because the industry around her had begun, slowly but significantly, to recalibrate its values. There she is, came a familiar voice. Elizabeth Winters approached, elegant as always but somehow less rigid in her bearing. The woman of the hour. Hardly, Olivia replied with a smile. This book is about a movement, it's not an individual. A movement you helped catalyze, Elizabeth pointed out. The Winters Foundation has now supported 15 projects using your community-centered approach. The results have been transformative, not just for the communities themselves, but for how we think about architectural responsibility. Olivia nodded, acknowledging the compliment. Over the past 5 years, she and Elizabeth had developed an unlikely partnership. Elizabeth brought institutional resources and connections, while Olivia contributed vision and methodology. Together, they had influenced architectural education programs, funding criteria, and industry practices. Your father would be proud, Olivia said, knowing how much Elizabeth's gradual reconnection with Robert Winters' original vision meant to her. Elizabeth's expression softened. I think he would. It took me too long to understand what he meant when he said architecture should serve people, not egos. She glanced around the gallery, where displays showcased various community-centered projects from around the country. He would have loved seeing this movement take shape. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sophie, now 14 and taller than Olivia remembered. The Butterfly Garden's young designer had become something of a fixture at Horizon Designs, spending time after school learning about architecture and environmental design. Mems Olivia, they're ready for you to sign books, Sophie announced importantly. She had appointed herself Olivia's unofficial assistant for the evening, taking the role very seriously. Duty calls, Olivia said to Elizabeth. Save me some champagne for after. Of course. As Olivia moved toward the signing table, she passed Michael Chun, deep in conversation with a group of architecture students from diverse backgrounds, part of a scholarship program he had established after his experience with Project Metamorphosis. The most revolutionary aspect of Ms. Garcia's approach, he was explaining, isn't the technical innovation, impressive as that is. It's the redefinition of the architect's role, from imposing a vision to facilitating a conversation. From creator to collaborator, the students nodded, taking notes. One young woman, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, asked a question about community engagement methodologies. Michael listened attentively, treating her query with the same respect he would accord a seasoned professional. Olivia smiled to herself as she continued toward the signing table. 5 years ago, that student might have been ignored at an event like this, judged by her appearance rather than her ideas. Small shifts but meaningful ones. The book signing proceeded for over an hour, with Olivia taking time to speak personally with each person who approached. There were young architects seeking advice, community members sharing stories of transformation, and industry veterans acknowledging how her work had challenged their thinking. Near the end of the line stood Grant Edwards, the renowned architect who had dismissed Olivia at the Apex Awards ceremony only to later become an advocate for community-centered design. Now in his 70s, he had recently announced his retirement from active practice to focus on architectural education reform. Olivia, he greeted her warmly, placing a copy of her book on the table. "Congratulations. This is an important contribution to the field. Thank you, Grant. Coming from you, that means a great deal." He smiled ruefully. "Do you remember our first interaction? At the Apex ceremony?" "Vaguely," Olivia replied diplomatically. "It was a busy evening. I dismissed you," he said plainly. "Listened to your ideas for a moment, found them interesting, then allowed myself to be pulled away because you didn't look like someone who mattered in our field." He shook his head. "It was a humbling lesson for me. We all have our blind spots," Olivia offered graciously. "Indeed. But not all of us get such clear opportunities to recognize them." He pushed the book toward her for signing. "What you've accomplished goes beyond buildings. You've helped reshape how we think about who belongs in architecture and what architecture is for. That may be your most lasting contribution." After the signing concluded, Olivia found a moment of quiet in a corner of the gallery, observing the diverse gathering that her work had helped bring together. Helen Forrester joined her, moving more slowly now at 85 but still sharp-eyed and perceptive. "Full circle," Helen remarked, nodding toward the space. "Same gallery, very different atmosphere. The industry is changing," Olivia acknowledged, slowly. Helen qualified. "But yes, it is. And you've helped it along." She studied Olivia with affection. "You know what pleases me most about your success?" "What's that?" "You've never compromised who you are. You didn't change to fit architecture. You helped architecture change to become more inclusive." Helen gestured toward Sophie, who was enthusiastically explaining one of the display models to a group of younger children. "And you're making sure the next generation won't have to fight the same battles." Elizabeth approached, champagne glasses in hand as promised. "Not at all," Helen assured her. "We were just reflecting on progress." Elizabeth handed them each a glass. "To progress, then, and to authentic architecture, created by authentic architects." They clinked glasses, the three women representing different generations and perspectives within the field, united by a shared vision of what architecture could and should be. As the evening wound down, Olivia found herself back at the spot where, 5 years earlier, she had stood unrecognized and underestimated, looking at the covered model of Project Metamorphosis. Now that project was not only built but had inspired others across the country, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond a single building or neighborhood. She thought about the journey, not just the physical creation of Project Metamorphosis, but the more challenging work of transforming perceptions and assumptions, of proving that great architecture could come from unexpected sources, so that valuable ideas couldn't be judged by appearances, and that the most meaningful success wasn't measured in personal recognition, but in positive impact on others' lives. The gallery had emptied now, just a few staff members remaining to clean up. Olivia gathered her things, preparing to leave. As she reached the door, she paused, looking back at the space one last time. 5 years ago, she had entered this room as an outsider, judged and dismissed based on her appearance. Tonight, she left it having helped change not just a building or a neighborhood, but an industry's understanding of where true value lies. Not in surface impressions, but in the depth of ideas, the integrity of purpose, and the courage to remain authentic in a world that too often confuses image with substance. Outside, the Chicago night was cool and clear, the city skyline illuminated against the darkness. Somewhere in that skyline stood Project Metamorphosis, its adaptive spaces continuing to serve and evolve with the community it was designed for. And beyond that, in cities across the country, other buildings were rising, each one shaped not just by individual vision but by collaborative conversation, each one challenging the notion that architecture belonged only to the elite or the privileged. Olivia smiled as she walked toward her car. The work wasn't finished, change rarely happened all at once, and old prejudices had a way of resurfacing in new forms. But tonight, in this moment, she could appreciate how far things had come and the role she had played in that evolution. It had begun with a simple choice to let her work speak for itself, to stand in her own authenticity rather than conforming to others' expectations. That choice had transformed not just her own path, but had helped others find their voices as well. And in the end, that was what architecture at its best had always done: created spaces where people could become more fully themselves, more connected to each other, more able to contribute their unique gifts to the world. As she drove away from the gallery, Olivia felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because she had proven her critics wrong or achieved personal recognition, but because she had stayed true to her purpose through it all, creating architecture that served people rather than egos, that included rather than excluded, that transformed rather than impressed. And really, she thought as the city lights blurred past her window, what greater success could any architect hope for than that? The humble woman once mocked for her simple appearance had not only proven her extraordinary talent, but had helped transform an industry's understanding of where true value lies. Not in appearances or connections, not in designer clothes or social status, but in the depth of ideas, the integrity of purpose, and the courage to create spaces that serve humanity in all its diversity. Project Metamorphosis had lived up to its name, catalyzing transformation that extended far beyond its physical structure, changing perceptions, challenging biases, and opening doors for others who might otherwise have been dismissed or overlooked. And Olivia Garcia, the architect who had let her work speak for itself, had never needed to change who she was to change the world around her. In staying true to herself, she had helped others see more clearly, look more deeply, and build more inclusively. It was, perhaps, the most meaningful design she could have created, not just of space, but of possibility.